Loren Schoenberg, and we have come to the very last session with Gene Krupa as an original member of the Benny Goodman Trio and Quartet. This is the complete Benny Goodman small group sessions on Victor. I'm here with Ken Peplowski and Kevin Dorn, who you'll hear from in just a moment. We're going to listen to them work out on By Mere Bist Duchesne from December 21st and 29th, 1937. Those Gene Shepard fans out there will remember that he used to tell a story. He said when he was a kid, when this record came out, he thought it was The Bear Missed the Train, and he could never quite, figure out those lyrics. I say wunderbar, how wonderful you are. The bear missed the train. Didn't really kind of make sense. But anyway, it's some wonderful music, and we're about to get into it. But before we do, Kevin.
Yes, well, this is we're coming to the end, like you said, of Gene Krupa's time with the band. And even though Benny Goodman had many great drummers after Gene, and Dave Tuff came in right after, and you can't get any better than Dave Tuff, but there still is something special about the original lineup. So it's just been wonderful going through these with both of you, and look forward to talking about this one.
And I couldn't agree more. I love these records. I actually haven't listened to a lot of them in a while, so it's been so much fun revisiting them. And as I mentioned before on a previous episode, I'm envious of the people that are experiencing this for the first time, because there's something about it. It's just all of us, and then there's hundreds and hundreds more musicians that when they first heard these recordings, it sparked something in them. And I think I know for the three of us, largely responsible for us pursuing careers in music, I think. So I hope everybody enjoys these. I'm sure they will. And hopefully we can shed some insight into these recordings too with the audio portions where we talk about the music.
Yeah. Well, folks, as we do for this series, we're going to shut off the video so you're not distracted by these three mugs, and just get into the music. Anyway, thanks, Ken. Thanks, Kevin. And now to the music. So let's start with the issued take that came out on a Victor 78 back in 1938. This is the issued take, once again, of By Mere Bist Duchesne.
Please let me explain. By mere bist Duchesne means that you're grand. By mere bist Duchesne, again I'll explain. It means you're the fairest in the land. I could say Bella, Bella, even say wunderbar. Each language only helps me tell you how grand you are. I've tried to explain by mere bist Duchesne, so kiss me and say you understand.
Well, you can hear just all the different sounds that he's getting from the snare drum, playing on the head of the drum, of course, and also playing rim shots where you play the rim and the head at the same time, and then also what's sometimes called a stick shot, playing one stick on the other. So just getting a whole great variety of sounds just playing on the snare drum. He was on the snare drum for the whole recording, and then also varying the different types of press rolls, going from sort of a regular kind of quarter note based roll to a continuous roll with an accent on 2 and 4, and some great bass drum accents that really punctuated the phrases nicely, and then a great fill near the end, which really stood out because he wasn't doing a lot of that. So that really jumped out and brought the intensity up. So all on the snare drum.
Yeah. Great playing from Gene Krupa there. You know, it's funny. I've been listening to a lot of him recently in different settings. And it seems as though like his signature eventually wound up being like a kind of like rap bop boop bop boo doo, you know, like snare solo with a certain kind of sticking. You've referred to it many times in the series, but a certain kind of sticking that you just like recognize the sound of it. Like, whereas many drummers, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the sticking sound that I ID with them.
Yeah, he definitely had some trademark phrases, and yeah, again, the sticking and sometimes things he would do between the stick and the bass drum, and just these wonderful patterns that he kind of would play some of them throughout his whole career. You can hear them in the 30s, you can hear them in the early 70s, and you know, just great stuff that always worked, and you hear it and you think, oh, Gene Krupa.
Yeah, I was also listening like to the first, you know, the record date that Billie Holiday did with Benny in 1933, Your Mother's Son-in-Law and all that. And even some of the 1930 things, I know that others have referred to it and we've probably talked about it too, but you know, he's doing ride cymbal things. I mean, he's doing all kinds of things like really early.
For sure. He plays ride cymbal in 1930 with Bix Beiderbecke on I'll Be a Friend with Pleasure. That always stood out. Yeah, he just he was a very creative player, and I think we've talked about this as well, but one of the things I like about him is that it seemed to me that he approached all of these things as just different sounds that he could get, and they were all a part of his playing. So he might play the ride cymbal behind Bix Beiderbecke in 1930, but then he might play a press roll behind a more sort of bebop kind of horn player in the 50s, and they would just all make it work. And it wasn't like, oh, a ride cymbal is modern and a press roll is old timey or this or that. They were just all sounds that he could get.
It's funny, right? I mean, I think a lot of it is latter day, and by that I mean us and people who write about it, but or people who talk about it many years afterwards. We impose upon it a certain kind of like chronological stylistic thing that was not what they were thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like on I think it's on Disc Jockey Jump or on one of those soundies or whatever. He's playing a press roll. He's playing all kinds of straights that you would never think that somebody would be playing with like an early bebop song, but he didn't think of it like that. I don't think. I think, you know, yeah.
Is there a definitive answer to who was the first person to play ride cymbals as we know it today?
The earliest recording that I know of anyone playing it is Ben Pollock, 1928, room 1411, which has Benny Goodman on it. Yeah. That's before that, the earliest recording I knew of was the I'll Be a Friend with Pleasure. And then years ago, Hal Smith hipped me to that Ben Pollock recording from 1928. That's the earliest recording that I know of. Yeah. But obviously that wasn't the first time anyone did it. And Baby Dodds said that he was doing it with King Oliver in 1923, and George Wetling said that he heard Baby Dodds do it with King Oliver at that time. So, you know, who knows? But I think,
it was just because of the limitations of recording at the time that they.
That would be my guess.
Yeah. Well, part of it though is, you know, it's funny. Like if you listen to Tony Spargo with the original Dixieland Jazz Band, right, 1917 and 18. I mean, he's playing a full drum set, and you can hear the bass drum, and you can hear the, you can all kinds of things. And then you have Krupa on the Mackenzie Condon date, in 1927, where he's clearly playing a big bass drum. And I mean, he's playing a drum set, and they talk about how revolutionary that was. And then you get, and even the Jelly Roll Morton Hot Peppers in 26 with Andrew Hilaire and these people. You get a sense of a full drum set being played. But then Zooty Singleton, we hear him in 1928 on the Armstrong records, and he's reduced to playing, a wood block or whatever the hell he's playing, or a snare drum or something like that. So I think it just really has to do with what they were allowed to do in the studio with the drums. And like Kevin was saying, if we could have heard King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band with a 4/4 walking bass and with a guitar and with a full drum set, I think people would be absolutely shocked, But then the weird thing would be, and this is like a weird, like evolutionary thing. All those trad bands, Lou Waters, I can't speak specifically about Lou Waters, but all those bands that came out in the West Coast in the 40s and the early 50s who were imitating what they heard on the record. Yeah. And the record was not at all what they were playing in person.
Right.
So.
And that still exists, incidentally.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not to call people out, but
right.
You and I both know a lot of band leaders that make the drummer just go like that, and do nothing else because that's what they heard on the original record,
Yeah. It would be like, like if you heard like one of those early talkies where people talked really stiffly and near the microphone, and then they'd go off, or like in Singing in the Rain in that movie, right?
Yes.
And then, like that's how people acted on stage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So but I'll get back to Benny, but you're talking about the sticking thing, which is so prevalent on this. However, like you've mentioned, Loren, and we all have, you hear people try to do that, and Gene Krupa is so much more subtle. You hear that as a percussive thing, but it's not in the way, and he's not on that recording, because I think the whole recording's very nicely laid back, very relaxed, very laid back. Benny's taking his time, and I think Gene, that's his contribution. He's adding that little bit of percussive excitement, but he's not, he's not all over the place. It's also, they use again that figure that we've talked about, and I think you mentioned to me the source of that, and maybe you can remind me that.
Georgia Jubilee.
Yeah, boy, that's used in so many small group arrangements by Benny. Yeah.
Yeah, and the tough thing also is that, those players, regardless of what part of the drum set they were playing or how large or small a setup they had, among other things, they all had an incredible groove. So, the people, when we're trying to do it now, it's, Gene Krupa, all these people, it's an incredible groove, and that sometimes gets lost. You can pick up on some of the specific licks and things, but these players all had a very deep musical foundation, and
they sound so relaxed on this, and this isn't a put down. It's not a real jazz song. It's this Yiddish thing that they turned into jazz, but the way they play it, and with that lick that they used, had they been performing this in broadcasts before they got to the studio? Because it really sounds like it's been played a bunch of times by them.
That's a great point, Ken, because I'm trying to think, in the 1939 Carnegie Hall concert where Charlie Christian does Stardust, and Benny introduces him and he says, "You've all heard Stardust played by the trio, by the quartet, by the big band." And I think that what happened was, in person in those days, they played a lot of the songs that the big band played. They played them with the small groups, and they played them with the trio. Sometimes they played them with the quartet. And so we think we know everything because we know all the records and the broadcasts. But that's an infinitesimal part of what these guys played. So who knows? They could have. So we have the big band version of By Mere Bist Schoen from Carnegie Hall just a couple of weeks after this. Lord knows what they had done with it and how they first did it.
Yeah.
Very well could have been, with Ziggy coming in as he does on the second part, his thing.
So just the way they played, the attitude, and so the little arrangement things, it's so flawless. I mean, again, I can speak from personal experience. I know that with the world's greatest quartet, couldn't pull off a flawless recording of that song if had that been the first time it was presented to a band.
Just quickly about Teddy Wilson, it's almost like, I don't know how to describe it, like they're playing a pared down style. In other words, like when we hear Benny and Teddy in the trio, like Teddy seems to do a lot more harmonic stuff and to be kind of all over the place. In this record, maybe because it's such a popular tune of the era, and just because it is such a simple minor song, he's really just like keeping all the simple bases covered. But even when he's doing that, the tremendous balance of the piano, the bass notes. And
to touch on something you mentioned about Teddy's playing, and we had addressed this in the last few shows, it's almost like a continuation of an attitude that maybe Benny had, or maybe they all did, of, okay, we've shown everybody our virtuosity. Now we can relax and just have some fun and play some songs as simple as we want or not, and who cares, because they all know we can play. And there is a certain vibe of that. It seems like running through at least the last few recordings that we've heard.
They could do such a wide variety of things so well, whether you hear them playing ballads or playing these really up-tempo things or just like a nice medium loping sort of groove. They do it all so well that if you just heard any of that, you could think, okay, that's what this band does pretty much. But all of it is so great.
all right, then, let's listen now to the unissued take of By Mere Bist Schoen. As you'll hear, it's a little bit faster. Anyway, here's the unissued version of part 1.
I thought this take in many ways was a lot hotter, more exciting, a little bit more adventurous. Except I thought there was a strange moment before Benny took off on his solo, where it was like they played a chorus of "Who's Got the Solo" between him and Lionel Hampton. They were both kind of very tentative around each other, which you almost never heard, And Benny clearly wasn't going to stray from just playing little bits of the melody and riffs. And it's just my imagination at work, but it feels like that made his actual solo more intense, because it was almost like, okay, you didn't want to solo on that. I'm going to show you what a solo is, And the ending was fantastic too. A lot more lively, and Gene played a little bit more too than he did on the first one.
I thought he dug in a little more with a little more accents on the press rolls or something.
Yeah.
It just seemed a little more swingy.
Yeah. Behind the vocals, he was really playing some nice syncopated stuff there.
Yeah, I think this one had even more of a groove, and even though he didn't do that big fill that he did in the other version, just overall the feel, and he was doing some offbeats on the bass drum, which he didn't do on the other take. He did some bass drum accents on the other take, but they were on the beat. So here he was playing a little offbeat on the bass drum every 2 bars, which is something I think of, Joe Jones did that on some of the Count Basie recordings around this same time. And again, you just also can hear, another thing that I think happens nowadays is something like a press roll is sort of looked upon, okay, well, it's just a press roll. But when you hear all these people play time on the snare drum, it's as individual as anything else. Gene Krupa's press roll doesn't sound like Dave Tufts, and they don't sound like the way Baby Dodds played a press roll, and that's different from George Wetling. So even just on the snare drum, they all had their own way of doing it, same as playing the ride cymbal or any other part of the drum set.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I think we've talked about this before, but these shows are also separated. We certainly shouldn't assume that every listener's heard every show that we've done. In the Joe Jones drum record, Joe Jones, the drums, I think it's Baby Love It he's talking about. And he talks about how like this great Kansas City drummer early would like play a press roll for like 30 minutes or something like that. And how he could play a whole night with nothing but a press roll. And you might say to yourself like, man, that would be horrible. Jesus, they had such control and finesse that they could actually really make it swing, and not quote unquote nothing but a press roll, right? In the right hands.
Well, there's a whole tradition of New Orleans drumming that's kind of centered around that in a way. That's goes back to the early Professor Longhair records and things like that, predating Little Richard and all that. And so it's a pretty rich tradition.
And now let's hear the other side of the 78 take. Well, it's the only take that we have of part 2 of By Mir Bist Du Schoen. And again, we will add this time Ziggy Elman on the trumpet doing his famous klezmerisms.
could say Bella, Bella, even say wunderbar. Each language only helps me tell you how grand you are. I've tried to explain thy mere bist shame. So kiss me and say you understand.
You know, it's funny. I think it was the Andrews Sisters hit record of By Mir Bist Du Shane that really started all that Yiddish stuff. And, you know, if you listen to Benny's records before this, the fall, winter of 1937, you'll hear no reference to Yiddish music or to the Poplitsky or whatever,
Yeah.
all those kind of dances and stuff that they did. And then when the Andrews Sisters came in with it and it kind of hit off, then all of a sudden, then they went down it. And then Ziggy pulled out, you know, these classic klezmer melodies that I guess, you know, anybody Jewish would have played at events and parties and things like that back in the day. And eventually, of course, what we heard there was it eventually wound up in a year later in And the Angels Sing.
It's almost like I mean, you try to put yourself into that time frame, you know, and how I can't think of a different word than exotic. It must have sounded back then to those people, to people listening, you know,
Yeah.
especially non-Jewish people. That's like, it'd be like if Benny did a record that was focused around the Irish reel, you know, it's pretty wild that he even thought to do that. I mean, it's way ahead of what they even started to call world music, you know, and I know the Andrews Sisters came up with it, but he really, he was great about latching onto those things and kind of taking them to the next step even. And I also thought it was interesting, obviously, since this was the other half of the record, they start by Lionel Hampton kind of starts to refer to the melody, but they quickly do away with that, and it turns into a very interesting two-part interplay thing between Benny and Lionel. And
Yeah.
Teddy and Gene are very much in the background, just letting them do their thing.
But on this, yeah, again, just to talk a little more about the snare drum and keeping time on the snare drum, just another aspect of that all these players had back then. The same way, if you're playing on a ride cymbal, you want to get a cymbal that has a nice sound to it that blends with the band. And if you're gonna be playing time on the snare drum, it's got to be the same thing. You don't want a sound that's going to interfere, and that's just another. When you're listening to these recordings, whether it's Gene Krupa or Dave Tuff or Zudi Singleton, any of these drummers, when they're playing time on the snare drum, they have the snare drum set up, and it's of course their touch as well, but just that it's a pleasing sound that gives a foundation and doesn't get in the way. It's not it's not abrasive, and it's the same way if you're playing brushes. You're most of the time playing time on the snare drum, and this is just same thing but with sticks. But it's the same. I've talked about before, sometimes Gene Krupa, when he's playing press rolls, it can almost sound like brushes. So and then that middle section, he goes to a cymbal, and so that also highlights the difference between those two parts. He plays them on different parts of the drum set. And I mean, that groove he gets into, then it almost sounds like a punk rock kind of thing. And he has a real busy bass drum going, and then he adds the snare drum in, and it's, yeah, I mean, that's incredible. And how many records back then do you hear that kind of thing?
And it also had a nice Teddy Wilson solo in there. Teddy had a thing in there, but it's just something. I think what makes it really different from any record that we've heard so far is it's how can I describe it? It's like it's in segments where they play the booba-doo-boo-ba-doo-bee thing, and so like it's not one fluid performance that goes from like the beginning to the end in a certain kind of way. It's like segments, like this segment, this segment, this segment, this segment, and that's neither good nor bad. It's just different. It's just different. And for whatever reason, I think of all the Goodman small group records with those 4 on them, this is probably the most obscure in a certain kind of way. I think most people don't even really know it exists. Well, that's the conclusion of that session. They only did, actually, that's over 2 sessions. They only did by Mir Bist Schoen. So let me throw in now something of a quintet with Harry James. But let's listen to the only existing air check of, instead of Ziggy Elman, Harry James with the Goodman Quartet.
Some tunes are hard to swing, some seem to drift toward swing, while others are just made to swing. Tonight, the Board of Trustees is going to dig at a song that was actually born in a jam session. It's Twilight and Turkeys, dudes, and the professor sends his version of it to you for the first time with a little special trumpet digging by Dr. Harry James.
Man, I wish there had been more of stuff like that. Incredible. But let's start with Kevin because, well, let's just start with Kevin because I was going to try and figure out what Gene was doing there, but maybe you can start to walk us through it.
I mean, he's doing some wild stuff for sure, playing all kinds of patterns over the tom-toms, and it sounded like the snare drum with the snares off as well, and just playing around the set, just doing, I mean, just driving it on the tom-toms. Then he goes to the hi-hat and throws in some tom-tom accents, again, just in really just perfect places. And then at the end almost gets into that kind of thing where they would do sometimes where everyone is sort of soloing at once, and he was playing all over the toms and also hitting it sounded like a tiny splash cymbal or something in these odd places. And it's, yeah, I mean, that was some avant-garde, way out stuff.
As soon as I started listening to that, I thought, here's the template for the Raymond Scott small groups.
Well,
Yeah.
I have to interject there because they're playing their version of a Raymond Scott record. That's Raymond
That's
Scott's
yes,
Twilight in Turkey, and so they're doing their version of it, right?
Yeah, that's because it sounds so. It's got all the stuff there, the exotica, the out harmonies, it sounds like the blueprint for a Raymond Scott record, but a lot more free and jazz influenced in a sense, but really impressive. I mean, an example of something that had to either have been played a bunch of times or rehearsed a bunch of times, because there's no way they could have just done that as a one-off. Honestly, that would have been impossible.
Yeah, and even what was nice about it was, even when they were doing something kind of as worked out as that and as intricate as that, it didn't sacrifice. There was still just that crazy energy that band had. It wasn't stilted at all because it was a somewhat more arranged thing. It's still, you knew that they had to have it worked out to some degree because of all the things that happened, but it had the energy of people just kind of going crazy and being in the moment.
Yeah, and along those lines, I remember from playing in big bands, it was always tricky to play, let's say, an 8 or 16 bar solo and come out of that right into a figure, and make it work. And they're doing that all the time. And that particular broadcast is a classic example. They never miss any of the arranged licks, yet they're playing those off of some brilliant improvised line.
Yeah, and another thing with those short solos or more arranged things is all of those players, whether they were playing arrangements or even when they were just playing small group jazz with nothing worked out, they all had such a sense of there being a shape to the whole thing, so that everyone sounds like they understood what just happened right before them and what's coming up, or there's some awareness of that, and it all flows together. And that gets lost sometimes when people try to do those things. There's not such a through line to the whole thing.
And since this has been kind of a short show, let's add one more special item. Most of you probably have not heard this. It's been issued on a few bootleg records over the years. But this is another Raymond Scott composition played by the Goodman Band. And we'll let Benny introduce it. I think you might find this surprising.
I'm going to turn the clarinet over to Arthur Rollini, our first tenor sax man, and I'll play his saxophone, or rather struggle with it. Harry James, our trumpet man, will take over the drum department. Ziggy Elman, another trumpeter, will play piano. Alan Roos goes from guitar to bass, and Murray McEachran folds up his trombone to handle trumpet and bells. And maybe we can get Krupa to conduct it. Huh?
I hope so. Anyhow, that sounds pretty fancy, Professor. What will the new combination play?
Well, since it's turned out to be a six-man quintet, it seems that we should play Raymond Scott's Powerhouse.
Turn it on.
Boys, don't get nervous, and if we get through this, I'll buy you all a package of Campbell.
So there we had Powerhouse, September 1937. Murray McEachern, trumpet and vibes, I guess that would be. Arthur Rollini on the clarinet, Benny Goodman on the tenor, sounding very much like Bud Freeman. Ziggy Elman, piano, Alan Roos, bass, Harry James on the drums, and Gene Krupa conducting.
Never would have guessed any of that in a blindfold test.
Can you imagine
Right.
if someone, if they found like a letter or something, someone says, "Oh, I caught Benny Goodman last week. It was so funny. He was playing the tenor and Ziggy Elman was playing the piano." You would say, "I don't know what this guy was smoking," but
Right.
yeah, it really happened.
I was fascinated by that version of Powerhouse, because I don't care who it is. If you played that to anybody as a blindfold test, no one would dare venture to guess that it was any of those people playing those instruments. And I was always fascinated and impressed by the fact that when Benny switched from clarinet to saxophone, which wasn't often, he didn't treat them as doubles. He treated them as two separate voices, which is a testament to his musicianship. As opposed to let's say a classic LA studio guy who can play any instrument and sounds great on all of them, but it's them on everything, because it's kind of the same licks and everything. But you're right. I mean, he sounds closer to Bud Freeman than Benny on that when he takes the solo.
Kevin, what did you think of Harry James there?
Yeah, he sounded great. I mean, he sounded to me almost kind of a combination of Gene Krupa and Dave Tuff. I could hear sort of, I don't know, if he was thinking that, but I could hear elements sort of both of them, I felt. And he sounded great. And he always had, I'm sure I've heard him play drums before because I know that he did, but I can't recall offhand. But yeah, he sounded great. And he always had such great drummers in his bands. It gives you more of an appreciation of that, how much he understood that, because he could obviously really play drums. So just, he had Buddy Rich in his band for years. He had Sonny Payne, he had Tony DiNicola. He just always had these excellent drummers. So yeah, it's pretty cool to hear that. Yeah, I certainly never would have guessed that's who it was.
Well, it's funny, there were periods, and there are a few broadcasts, and there are some photos in the odd periods where Dave Tuff was out or Buddy Schutz was coming in or whatever, where he played in the quartet. He actually played drums with the quartet and could really kind of, hold his own there.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I thought this is a nice way to wrap up this very short episode of our series. So once again, we heard the quartet, quintet, and Martha Tilton versions of By Mir Bist Schoen, and then a couple of odd broadcasts, Twilight and Turkey, and then this one, Powerhouse, just showing, how popular, as Ken mentioned, those Raymond Scott things were. And when you read the Metronome and Downbeat magazines of 37 and 38, because there was nowhere to put Raymond Scott, because his stuff was so originally outrageous that they put him in the swing jazz category. And they're really not jazz records. No. Whatever the hell a jazz record is, they're just great records. But yeah. Well, okay, just another fascinating show. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We will be launching off into the world of Dave Tuff very shortly. So until we meet again here on this series, take care, everyone, and stay safe.